All right, everyone, welcome. It is November. It is just about final exam season in law school. Today, we're going to talk about how you outline for your law school finals. Good time to talk about this. Hopefully, this video will serve you well, and anyone watching this years from now will be served well by it. We're just going to go over some basics, some tips, and yeah, let's just dive right into it. So, first of all, what is outlining? It's compiling and condensing all of your notes from the class into one big document for the final exam. So, let's talk about the timing of outlining. I recommend that you do it as you go along. So, if you haven't started outlining yet, it's not the end of the world, but I do think it's helpful to actually do it as you go along after each class, kind of put down the cases and the stuff you learned from each class into an outline. You can trim it down later. And yes, it can be time consuming, but it will also save you time later. Work more now so that you can work less later. It's a good trade off, actually. Doing it as you go along also helps you understand it better when you're in class. So you won't just have come fresh off of reading it, but you'll actually be outlining it. So you'll get that extra effect of having it in your head as you outline it, not just from after you read it. And now, if you do wait until the end of the semester, that is, still try to give yourself at least 2 weeks to create your outline. 1 week could probably work, but if you have a bunch of other classes, like say 3 other classes, 4 other classes, heaven forbid, then you're gonna want to give yourself a lot of time for this outline because you have a bunch of other stuff on your plate, and you have to you can't really go too hard into one subject without going at the expense of others. So yeah, I say probably 2 weeks to outline, and that's for all of your classes if you put them off till the end. Strategies. You will probably want to write your own outline rather than do a group outline. Group outlines can get a little bit messy. I know teamwork makes the dream work, but outlining is kind of an exception. If you do a group outline, make sure that you fully understand everything that your group wrote in there. See, part of the problem is that sometimes the other members of your group, your team, might put stuff in there, and you don't actually see them put that in there, and then you just see that in there later, and you're like, "Oh wait, what's this referring to?" They might use some sort of shorthand, some acronyms, something that you don't know what they meant, where they got it from. Was it in the book? Did the professor say it on some random Tuesday during lecture? Like, where is this from? So you kind of want to make sure that everyone is on the same page when you're outlining. Put quotes from your professor in the outline. Just do it. The professor is a master of their class, even if they don't teach it that well. These quotes can be surprisingly useful. And if you use their wording on an exam, an essay, that can be helpful. You want to speak their language because that will make them very happy. It's also helpful for multiple choice. If you can remember some random niche thing that they said, some quote, something like that from class, write some of that stuff down, and then you have your outline next to you, you're taking the exam, and you're on a multiple choice that just seems really weird and difficult to answer. And then you look in your outline and see, oh yeah, um, back on October 14th, my professor said this. Interesting. Okay, so this basically answers the question. And you wouldn't have got that from the book or notes. That's something they do sometimes is, you know, the book is helpful, but the professor's also there to give you essentially their own version of the book, assuming that they didn't write the book, which some of them do. But yeah, your professor gets the final say. Your book doesn't get the final say. So that's just something to keep in mind as you go about these final exams. Bullet points are a good way of organizing things, but I would say you don't want to use too many. Um, if your outline consists of pages and pages of just bullet points on end, that is going to hurt your organization. It's going to make it a little painful to look at. You want to separate it out. Use headings at the top of your bullet points, divide it up by section. Um, yeah, just be mindful of that. To each his own, though. So I guess if you want to flood your pages with bullet points, that's fine. But yeah, I think bullet points are good, but not like they're not supposed to carry your outline. They're not supposed to be the bulk of it. Um, they just kind of clarify stuff, add stuff. It's mostly actually the case law in most classes that's going to do the work for you. Case law or some statutes, depends on the class. But if you're looking at like a con law class, it's the case law that's going to be doing most of the work for you. It's the case law that you're going to cite because it's the Supreme Court interpreting the Constitution. So yeah, that's my take on bullet points and organization. Another thing is you want to be concise when you write out a case, especially if you're having your outline printed out, because we want to save trees, use fewer pieces of paper, and it just sucks carrying a big clunky outline into a class. If you can get it in like under 20 pages, that is really cool. So with cases, what I mean by being concise is if there's a bunch of facts in there that aren't really super relevant or that you can remember without having them in your outline on the final exam, keep those facts out. So I've got an example for you here. This is from Civ Pro, Piper Aircraft Co. versus Reno. I put the year and the justice that wrote it. That's just something I do. You could argue I could take it out to be even more concise. So basically, it involved a motion for dismissal on forum nonconvenience. Those are all the facts that I really care about in that case. And the holding of that case was that if the defendant is seeking more friendly law in the alternative forum, that doesn't matter. The possibility of change in law favorable to the defendant should not be considered when the court is evaluating a forum nonconvenience motion. So you might notice if you've read that case, I left out a ton of facts in there. There is a bunch of stuff that goes on in Piper Aircraft Co., but I did not put that in there because it's not super relevant. Piper Aircraft mostly stands for this one policy, this one holding that I laid out there for you. There's a little caveat to it too that I would put in there, but yeah, this is Piper Aircraft. This is how a lot of these long cases that really only stand for one major proposition should be laid out in your outline. The more concise you can keep them, the better. So that's that on concision. Make sure that as you're writing your outline, you actually fully understand what you're writing, because outlining is done mostly for the process rather than the end result. That's not the same with everything. You know, we don't go to the gym just for the process. We go to the gym so that we can get jacked. But outlining is mostly for the joy of getting it in your head. The practice of that is very helpful. If you don't do it, you simply come in with less practice with the subject matter in your head. You also want to, of course, do practice by taking practice final exams from previous years that your professors give you. But yeah, outlining is just another really keen way to drill it into your head. But it only gets drilled into your head if you actually understand what you're writing and you're not just mindlessly copying down stuff from your notes or whatever. Tables can help with organization. I feel like too much tables, though, like with bullet points, can get a little messy, actually, but they can be really helpful for some things. Like if you want to separate out some concepts, use the tables. Maybe even with cases, you know, sometimes people do facts, issue, holding, reasoning, all within tables. I don't really do that because I just prefer to be more concise, but to each their own. Highlighting and use of different colors with text. It's fun, it looks pretty, but it can also be very helpful. For example, using highlighting for cases and dark blue color for statutes, usually put it in bold so that you know, just when you see the mirror highlighting as you're going across your page, you're like, okay, that's a case, that's a case, that's a case. You see the bold dark blue, you're like, okay, that's a statute, that's a statute, that's a statute. For example, Civ Pro involves statutes, federal rules of civil procedure, and cases. Admin law involves statutes, cases, statutes mostly in the form of the Administrative Procedure Act. Constitutional law involves cases, article, amendments, all that stuff. So make sure that you use different formatting for different authorities. I just think it's helpful. You don't have to do it, but I like it. It makes the outline prettier to look at, and it's kind of helpful. But this next one, only do it if it doesn't take up too much space and you really feel it's going to be helpful. But you could also include hypotheticals discussed in class. Hypotheticals help shed some light on things as you're thinking about situations on the final exam. Maybe your essay, you come to realize, is very, very similar to a hypothetical that you discussed in class. And you can think about the answer that you guys gave to that hypothetical in class, the analysis, and maybe that analysis is really similar. So you can put some of that down on the final exam. And so having that hypothetical in there can be really helpful. You might also happen to remember the hypothetical anyhow, and so you can apply it that way. So it's definitely not necessary to include hypotheticals discussed in class. If you do include hypotheticals, try to be concise with them. Uh, Try to make sure they're not taking up half a page, but they can be kind of useful. Also, as an addendum, so some people don't consider this outlining. You could definitely put this in your outline, even though it takes up a lot of space. Do pre-writes for some of the big rules discussed in the class. Um, there are so many things. I mean, like formation of a contract. We all know, yeah, contract requires consideration, acceptance, offer, all that stuff. I've included an example here for you to see. This is from admin law. Um, and there are a lot of these big rules in admin law that come both from cases and from the Administrative Procedure Act. So, yeah, I wrote here the actions of an agency may be challenged as procedurally defective when the final rule adopted by an agency is not a quote logical outgrowth from what the agency included in its initial notice of proposed rulemaking to the public. For example, the agency may provide notice of certain subjects and issues involved as required by APA Section 553C3 in its notice, but then produce a final rule which incorporates additional subjects and issues which were never mentioned in the notice. Thus, the final rule cannot depart dramatically from the original notice, and if it does, then it will not be considered a logical outgrowth, and a new notice and comment period will be required. For those of you who have taken admin law, you probably know that this is essentially the rule section for logical outgrowth doctrine. A lot of professors, I mean, at least in my experience, talk about how they kind of like to see IRAC or crack on your exams. It's good for writing legal memos and briefs, but it also is pretty good organization for a final exam. So you start off with your conclusion, you don't bury the lead, give them the rule, and it helps to just come with that rule like prepared. You have a pre-write and you can just slam that stuff down instead of thinking about, okay, let's see, what's the rule for logical outgrowth? What's the rule for a contract? What's the rule for a 12b6 motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim in CivPro? So if you just have this stuff with you, that is amazing preparation, and it will serve you well. It will save you time. It'll make you look good on the final exam. So yeah, pre-writes are helpful. Sometimes even more helpful than outlining itself, I've found. But yeah, that's my addendum there. I hope that you found this video helpful. These are the tips that were most helpful for me in particular, as well as some that I've heard are helpful for other people. There's no one size fits all rule. Everyone's brain works differently. We all get ready in different ways. Um, I have come to actually kind of enjoy outlining. I like to be creative with how I create one. In some classes, I didn't even do an outline. So if you feel you can get by without one, you can save some time. Um, for example, if your exam is a 24-hour take-home exam, maybe you don't totally need an outline. Like you can just reference your notes so easily within that time period that you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, most people agree that outlining is generally helpful. People do it in a lot of different ways. But yeah, it's all up to you. I hope that you can take this into account, and that you can consider this going forward. I hope that your law school exam season goes swimmingly, that you can get all A's, and that you can create an outline that helps you get those good grades based off of this video, as well as some pre-writes. But yeah, let me know what you think of these tips in the comments. And if you found this video helpful or insightful, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.